I started this project with Scull model I did for one of my previous projects. It was sculpted in Zintopo mode using some anatomical references, nothing fancy really. I will include this model in files so you can download it and use it in your own project if you like. So when my project looked like this and I didn't know what to do with this, I made this orthographic sketch. I just wanted to find general proportions and idea, just to feel the silhouette. I use it a lot in my workflow when I don't know what to do next. I just use annotate tool for this kind of stuff. So yeah, it helps me a lot. Usually I start modeling with main biggest parts. I make biggest parts and then I fill gaps between them. So in this case it was this, this, this and this, I guess. I'm gonna talk about them a little bit later. But when I modeled them, I chose a couple of camera angles. So side view, back view and front view. I just wanted to have ability to check my model from these main three angles. The overall shapes of main parts are built with subdivision modifier. It's a quick and dirty work. I don't care about topology too much, as you can see. If it works fine in render, it's fine with me. I'm not too picky. The smallest details are booleans on top of subdivision. Let's see how it works on this example. So here is the base shape. As you can see, it's very simple, nothing fancy here. Then mirror, bevel, subdivision. I place bevel before subdivision so I can control this ridge here. After that, solidify, just to add some thickness to it. And when I'm happy with overall shape, I do booleans. So yeah, this is basically how I do this kind of stuff. The smallest parts are very simple, just a basic geometry with booleans, just to make it look more complex. We don't need actually complex geometry here. We just need to create sense of complexity. I'm making those with hard ops, box cutter, mesh machine. Those gribbles are created with random flow add-on, very useful tool. In some areas I just use kit bashing. I just drop some stuff just to fill some area. It usually looks good in render, even though it looks like shit right here. Oh yeah, I usually fill, as I said before, the areas between main distinctive objects with very dense simple geometry, and it creates really great visual contrast. The details with more curvy shapes are created with subdivision, just like main objects. So this one too. Sometimes this kind of bad geometry actually creates a pretty nice result in render, so I just keep it. It happens sometimes. The best way to work with cables is to use hooks, in my opinion. Basically you just place 3D cursor where you need it, and then you choose hook and align it with 3D cursor using machine tools. It's very simple. I use additional control point to control the shape of the cable. You can also scale hook. So when I need to add additional details to cables, I usually convert curves to standard mesh and just do modeling on it. Yes, it's destructive, but I usually save backup of the curve and it's not a big deal. I want to mention one important thing here. I'm using Bevel Shader in my workflow, so yeah, it catches the light even though there is no real bevel on the model. Without Bevel Shader you need to add one extra layer of small bevel just to make it look good, just to make edges catch the light, and it overcomplicates things, so I just use Bevel Shader. It's much more flexible in my opinion, and this way you can keep geometry very simple. When I bump into issues like this, I use Mesh Machine normal transfer to correct normals issues. This is stash. This is object we're gonna copy normals from. You just need to select damaged area and transfer normals from another object. Mirror it, and now everything looks perfect. So let's talk about how I made this. Let's turn off solidify and subdivision just to have better performance. So this is baked simulation, and initially this object looked like this. I just built it around Scull model, and I tried to keep edge loops around eyes and nose, and just to have better simulation. I modeled those buttons and this. Another important thing is to have pin group. This is vertices that gonna be pinned in simulation. It's here. They gonna stay in place when simulation starts. Another important thing here is to have collisions on object which is gonna be interact with this wrap. So there is collision on Scull object and on this object. The most important parameters in simulation is quality steps, collisions, quality of collisions, object collisions, self collisions. We need to turn it on. Also, gravity is off. Pin group, as I said before. And the most important parameter is pressure. In this case it needs to be negative value, and this is what creates this vacuum package effect. Another important thing is we need to have very dense geometry to have these little wrinkles. So in this case, before cloth simulation, I added subdivision modifier with very high number, 4 in this case. Here I baked simulation already, and after it's finished I added another extra level of subdivision just to make it look even more smooth, and solidify to add some thickness to it. This is very important in rendering. Same with this object. So this is initial shape, this is pin group, and in this case I turn it off pressure. I just wanted it to like hang. To be honest, it was a little bit unexpected result. I'm not sure why it's bunched up here. I thought it would slide a little bit lower, but I kinda like this result, so I kept it. And again I baked simulation, and when it's finished I added another subdivision and solidify. This stuff can be easily created with hard ops. You just select like outer edges and curve extract. Very easy. In this case I modified a little bit the curve to create this detail, just for visual interest. So let's talk about shaders. Usually I use very limited amount of shaders in my projects. It's just 3 or 4 basic materials with variations. So in this case I have this main rubber thing, the more darker version of it, and the red one. Couple of versions of metal, more reflective one and more glossy one, and this wrap material. Shaders are very simple. The main part is bevel node, as I mentioned before. it helps with catching light on edges. I don't use procedural workflow, I just use bitmaps. So this is scratch, roughness map, edgeware mask is based on Bevel Shader as well, and the dust mask is ambient occlusion node mixed with couple of bitmaps. When I'm looking for camera angles for renders, I use stored views add-on. It comes with Blender by default, so basically you can save view and get back to it later. So yeah, I just rotate my model in orthographic mode, I rotate it in perspective mode, and I just save anything I like. Let's talk about graphic decals, like this one. I use decal machine add-on to place decals on complicated surfaces. So basically it works like this: you place decal where you need it, and then you just project it. Yeah, so very easy. When you have your decal on flat surface like this one, you don't need to project it, just place it and it's gonna be fine. So yeah, that's basically it. My usual lighting setup is combination of HDRI lighting and a scene lighting. I also use these light block panels. I'm gonna talk about them later. So in this case I used this HDRI from hdriheaven.com. It's called Empty Warehouse. The first thing I usually do is I turn off HDRI completely, so my scene is absolutely dark. After that I start to add lights one by one. Basically what I'm trying to do is to find a nice looking visual contrast, like here for example, nice looking silhouette and transparent parts. A little bit of light here, big chunk of light here, and a rim light. I use spotlights usually, and the main parameter is, in my opinion, is size. The bigger size is the softer light you get. When I'm happy with result, I turn on HDRI back again. And couple of words about light block panels. So the reason I add those, because I want again create visual contrast. So what is light block panel? It's just, well, it's plain with emission material completely black. So I turn off camera visibility for this object, so I can't see it in render, and basically it blocks light from HDRI or other light sources. So without it it's kind of boring. And if I add this, this creates this dark rim here, and I really like how it looks. So those two in front, they create this reflection on front mask. Again, without it, it looks rather boring, and it's much better in my opinion. So yeah, that's basically how it works. My final render resolution is usually 5 or 6K, something like this. By the way, I'm using photographer add-on. It has this very useful feature when you can have like resolution override. It's basically you can have custom resolution on each camera of yours. From the passes, I'm using the noising data only. I turn it on just in case. I'm not using it every time. Sometimes I feel like the noised images are too clean in my opinion, but it's useful to have this just in case. As for compositing, I don't use it. I don't really like compositor in Blender because it's very slow, and I usually don't do any compositing in Blender. Couple of words about my post process. Usually I don't do any paint overs or stuff like this. Usually I just process my raw render with a couple of steps. There is a couple of things I always do. The first is lens correction. I use it to add chromatic aberrations to my image. Yeah, I just like them. I think they make image more realistic. So the second step is smart sharpen. Renders are not sharp enough by default in my opinion, so I like to do a little bit of sharpening here. Well, to be honest, I overdo it a little bit, but in my opinion this looks better. So here is, I have 200%, and this pixel number is based on the smallest size of the image. The next step is I added a little bit of noise. I don't like when my image look too clean. I think this makes it a little bit more cinematographic. It's a subtle adjustment, but I like to have it. And just a tiny bit of desaturation. That's basically it. No other actions or steps I did on this.